Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We'll give a few more people a few more minutes to trickle in before we get started. Okay, perfect. And thank you for getting the chat rolling. Welcome to our webinar today on deep work with Jason Griffith. He's a senior software engineer here at Uplevel who's very passionate about implementing and protecting deep work. So throughout the webinar today, keep an eye on the chat. Thanks for putting in where you're listening in from already. We'll be posing a few questions throughout, so just keep an eye on that. And we love an active and interactive chat. So with that, I will pass it on to Jason.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Appreciate it. Well, hello, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Jason Griffith. I've been a senior software engineer here at Uplevel for about a year, but I've been a professional coder for over 25 years at 9 different companies, including Redfin, Microsoft, and Tableau. And during that time, I've experienced what it is to have abundant deep work time and what it is to have next to none. And given the choice, I'll take the first option at just about the speed of light, but sometimes that choice isn't quite so easy or clear. I'm also a big fan of dogs, but I'm sure it's not going to be too relevant to us. Oh, I forgot to advance the slide. There we go. That's the one I want. This is what we're going to go over today. And by the end, I hope to provide you with a few tips, tricks, and/or strategies to help you create more deep work time for yourself. And as mentioned, please keep an eye on the chat. We're going to be posing a few questions throughout. So I've said the phrase deep work a couple of times now, and I suppose it's time to give our definition of what that means. Deep work is uninterrupted, continuous time where an engineer can focus on their main delivery target. We're all trying to build something wherever we are, and that something is usually not trivial. So if an engineer's time is broken and diffused, it's going to be difficult to get that something deployed. At Uplevel, our software considers deep work as 2 or more hours of uninterrupted, unbroken focus time. So no group meetings, few if any Slack or chat interruptions, and during the engineer's usual working day. We find and present through our software how much time engineers have for deep work, showing when perhaps someone is being overly interrupted or having their priorities switched up on them or otherwise unable to pursue their main goal. All right, so why should anyone care about having deep work? This brilliant comic by Jason Harris sums up what happens when deep work isn't respected. The comic may be pretty familiar as it's been linked and copied and inserted into presentations all over the world. But that's because most professional developers have been there. You're hunting down some bit of ill-documented logic, unwinding all the stacks, tracing through all the services, carefully carrying a weebling, wobbling Jenga-like tower of discovery all on your brain when, hey, so I sent you an email about that thing, right? Hopefully not everything vanishes into the void, but something will. It's an efficiency concern. The opposite of deep work is context switching. And just like in multi-threaded programming, each switch has an overhead. Every time you have to page out your X current task and page in the new current task, that's time you're not spending on moving either task forward. Deep work opens time for focused productivity and complex problem solving. It's also a human concern. It's incredibly frustrating to feel held accountable for many different projects or services and have to constantly juggle between them, never really getting the opportunity to do anything substantial or meaningful in any of them. Most software engineers want to build something substantial and are made happier by doing so. So avoid burnout by building substantial things and build substantial things through deep work. And deep work clearly isn't the norm for everyone, or else we wouldn't be here having this conversation. There we are. There's usually two sides to this situation, maybe more, but the two big ones are managers and individual contributors, also known as ICs. Managers are usually invested in what the engineers are building, and they want to know how it's going. And that's fine, but not if the updates are requested too often, causing distractions. Or maybe they're overly concerned with implementation details, pinging engineers with technical questions, or overriding too many decisions. At Microsoft, I had a manager who was relatively new to management, having moved from IC engineering. And I was constantly and seemingly at random getting questions about small fiddly details of my project, and it was really making it hard to make any progress. So what helped was actually I called a one-on-one meeting with this person and asked why they needed to know these things. And were they dissatisfied with my performance, or did they have any concerns about the architecture or anything like that? And now what turned out happening was he was just getting questions from other managers and was passing them along. So what we did was we set up an email list and published it. And that way all the questions about this project could go there and I could answer it at a more time appropriate for me. I'd encourage any managers listening that giving your reports autonomy and space will give you the best results. Trust that they're doing what they're paid to do, but periodically verify and make sure. Nothing wrong with looking at PRs now and then, but suddenly pulling aside the engineer to ask questions is a surefire way to break their deep work. Reconsider the questions. Are they critical to product function or just a little bit curious? In either way, just save the questions for after stand-up or between meetings or when they're between other tasks. And another fine way to make sure that progress is happening is just to have regular demos. Nothing that requires extra setup or time, because that itself is a distraction, but just something where you can see progress is steadily moving forward. For ICs, if you find your deep work under constant threat from managers and other stakeholders, take some time to talk to them and find out what they need to give you your space. Be open and honest, but with kindness. Everyone involved has their own concerns and priorities. And if everyone can transparently discuss what those are, you get the best chance to find those win-win solutions where you get your deep work time and they get whatever it is that they need to. There are ways to explicitly create deep work times. Depending on your company rules and team agreements, some will be more or less feasible for you than others, but when in doubt, asking should be okay at least. If you don't ask, you don't get. So throw a few calendar blocks on yourself for deep work time. Personally, I recommend having your work calendar set to visible by all. So that way, if somebody does need to schedule a short notice meeting where you may or may not be required, they can make an educated guess whether or not they need to break your deep work time. Practice some meeting foo. Knock down the number of meetings if at all possible. It should always be okay to ask the host if your attendance is truly required. But really, that question ought to be answerable because meetings should have a well-defined agenda that lists what's going to be discussed and what the key takeaways are. And this helps you decide whether or not to attend or to politely decline. And it keeps the meetings firmly on the rails. At Microsoft, every time I received a meeting invite without an agenda, I'd mark myself as tentative and just follow up with a question, what's the goal of this meeting, please? And if I didn't receive an answer, I didn't go. And it didn't take too long of doing that and encouraging other people to do that too before all the meetings I saw had agendas attached. Has your team, or perhaps the entire company, thought about having a meeting-free or meeting-light day of the week? Can you negotiate the meetings you must attend to be contiguous or at the start or end of your working day? Personally, I'm a big fan of just before lunch stand-ups or early Monday morning plannings or late Friday retros, but see what works for you and your team. There we go. Turns out polls block my view. Cool, good to know. It's unfortunately not enough to only create space for deep work to happen. Interruptions and distractions fill our world, and that's not always bad, but they can be detrimental to deep work. Chat messages are going to come into your team's channels from other teams or other stakeholders, emails too. But without an established rule on how to handle incoming communications, it's up to every individual to decide whether or not to break their deep work in order to respond. And sometimes no one does, or sometimes everyone does. Is your team able to set up a role, possibly rotating, to be the responder for your team? One person takes a hit to their deep work to protect everyone else's. And we did this at Tableau. Our team, which was an internally facing DevOps team, picked out one person per sprint to be the public relations person. And their top priority task was for that sprint was just to respond promptly and then delegate the work appropriately without breaking anyone's focus unnecessarily. Outside satisfaction with our team increased as people felt heard. To them, their messages weren't just disappearing into the void, they were getting prompt responses, and most of our team could continue with their goals uninterrupted. When an interruption does occur, it's important to be clear on the opportunity cost of switching. Sometimes that price needs to be paid, but if everyone is aware of what the costs are, the interruptions may happen less. So in that comic, Programmer Interrupted, if the last panel had the developer saying, hey, just so you know, that cost me 2 hours of time, I will get your email later. I mean, the comic would be a lot less funny, but that person will be less apt to repeat that, hopefully. If notification icons do break your deep work, spend a little time tweaking your tools to be notified less. You can create email rules to route incoming email into other folders to keep your email notification number down. Chat apps can usually be set to do not disturb unless you really mean it. And individual channels can be muted or quieted as appropriate. Email apps can even be closed down entirely, opened and answered only between your deep work blocks. Deep work is most effective when you can set up your environment for maximum success. Either at the office or at home, a quiet, private place to concentrate is an asset. And that's not always entirely possible, but every little bit helps. If you can't have total quiet or total privacy, well, noise canceling headphones are a pretty nice tool to have. Personally, I need to put my phone on quiet and out of reach. Otherwise, I endanger my deep work times whenever I have to run something that occupies my computer for more than 5 seconds. Browser extensions are out there that can block certain websites if that's a temptation, but if that temptation is too great, could even go hardcore and edit your host file to make sure that those social media and other distracting sites just route to the local host so they can't be checked. If it's hard to find larger blocks of time, do the best with what you got. The Pomodoro technique is a method of 25-minute segments of focused, distraction-free time, followed by coming up for air and rest. There's more to it than that, but that's the main core. Unless you're on call or otherwise critical to operations, this would mean shutting down all chat and email apps entirely, setting a timer, and then just burning down your task list until you hear a ding. You don't necessarily have to make them 25 minutes or any other specific detail, but the idea is to create space to focus on one and only one item at a time with no distractions. And focusing your time on fewer things is another great way to make sure that progress is achievable. Talk with your team about distributing keep the lights on, KTLO, tasks like bug fixing or on call, about distributing those things to lessen the amount of interruptions possible during a day. Having the Scrum Master or that responder role we talked about previously, fielding these concerns first will allow the rest of the team to have one less thing to worry about. Jira epics are usually large pieces of stakeholder value, and being spread across many makes it difficult to make progress in any of them. You may be able to make better use of your deep work by focusing on fewer epics. Talking with stakeholders about the opportunity cost of being spread too thin, especially if you can talk in terms of currency lost or spent, people listen to dollars, helps everyone understand that bouncing between goals isn't free, because it may appear to be free to them. They just need some help understanding that it isn't. Same with having an extreme number of code repositories. The more spread out the code is, the more pull requests are required to make meaningful change, and the harder it is for reviewers to see the whole big picture. It also takes more times that you have to possibly break other people's deep work in order to get responses. If you see that you're operating out of a lot of repositories, can they be combined? Just because code repositories are combined doesn't mean anything about how the code is built or deployed. You can still have a massive armada of microservices all living out of the same repository. Would fewer repos make life easier for you? Yeah, if so, I bet you're not alone. If you speak up, you might find more support than you might expect. Oh, I had to have this dog in here. All right, so what are the key takeaways? Deep work is uninterrupted time to do cool, serious, valuable work. So if you're a manager, pretty please give your developers as much as they can get. But if you're an IC, set some boundaries and strongly advocate for yourself and your deep work. Meetings are a source of consternation, but they're also necessary for discovery and information sharing. So please take some time to make sure you're getting as much value as you possibly can out of them while avoiding unnecessary context switching. To get the deepest of deep work, limit interruptions and remove distractions to protect that deep work time. And making sure any one individual's workload isn't overly broad or too spread out will help them and the team make better progress during those deep work times. While deep work is one of those, of course we want that things, it's a little bit harder to get in practice than in theory. With these tips and suggestions, we hope that you will be able to create more deep work times for yourself, protect them adeptly, and use them to reduce your burnout and to develop great things, of course. Are there any questions? Need to get the chat back on. That was the wrong button turned out. There's the chat. All right. Are there any questions? Let's see. I'm looking through.
If there's any questions, we can post them in the chat. It looks like there is one, Jason. It says, how long would you define as deep work time? And do you find people often hit that amount consistently?
Yeah, so I would define deep work time really as 30 minutes or more. Anything that you need to really sit down and get your current task in mind, get deep into that, that comic where everything was blown up like that. And for me personally, that it takes a few minutes to get there and then make some meaningful change. Our software looks for 2-hour blocks, right? And it will adjust based on like what's happening during that time. But that's like, how our software views them. And for myself, and do I find people often hit that amount consistently? It really depends on the environment and what's going on with the team and the company. I've definitely had situations where almost nobody was able to focus because there were constant fire drills or priorities changing constantly. That makes it really difficult to set up deep work time because you're focusing on all these different things. However, in other companies where might have an ops team who handles on-call issues and that sort of thing, and then individual product teams are able to focus on what they're building, much more apt to get those deep work times for sure. It says ICs can help each other protect deep work time. Yes. Yes, Chris, thank you very much. Chris says, a thing that occurred to me listening is this: ICs can help each other protect deep work time. For example, if you know a peer is in deep work, proactively handle things that might otherwise go to them. Absolutely, yes. For teams, I guess having that one person who can just basically be the first layer of response was so incredibly helpful to us. Our team was one that had to respond to internal customers, so we had other engineers chatting with us, and it was difficult when nobody had that role. You didn't know when a message came in, like, should I answer this? Should I not answer that? There was like a lot of worry, and that's all time where you're broken out of deep work and not working on anything other than wondering if you should respond. And so that team base where one person took that role protected everybody else, and that was great. Also, I found that just sharing how you're doing things, like the idea of all meetings must have agendas to keep them focused, short, and with a good takeaway. I definitely spoke with other engineers and encouraged them to do that too. And it was through all of us kind of collectively saying, hey, you know what, we like agendas, that they started really showing up. So absolutely talk with other team members, do what you can. If you have less important things going on, field those interruptions and distractions, make sure other people know so they're not bothering somebody else who might be deep. And yeah, it's a team game. Development is definitely a team game. Any other questions or comments or anything?
Okay, I think, oh, one more question from Haley. It
Yeah.
says, do you block out your calendar for every deep work period?
Not everyone, but I definitely do block out my calendar when it's important. So for this presentation, I blocked out a number of different places where I said, I'm practicing this presentation. And that absolutely helps. I've had other times too where I've had to focus on something that was really difficult and meaningful, and I'll block out 2, 3 hours. But then having that block there and it's visible to everybody else, if somebody has a burning issue, they can look at my calendar and see like, okay, well, he's working on this other task, and they can decide like, okay, well, is my burning issue more important or less important than this deep work time? Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you, Jason, so much for this wonderful presentation. I know I've taken a lot of takeaways that I want to implement into my day for deep work in my week. So if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Jason on
Yes.
LinkedIn or reach us at Uplevel, and you will be receiving a recording with this presentation, and we will stay in touch.
Thank
So
you so
thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Have a great day.